Tencent is the largest technology company in China based on market cap. However, the truth not many know them since they dominate largely only China. Still, people know the company as the one behind WeChat, the dominant social media company in China with over 1 billion users, but they are far more than just a social media company as they have other interests ranging from video games to financial services. Tencent has had one of the strongest stock returns ever since its IPO in 2004. At its peak in 2021, the share price of Tencent increased by 91,000, giving it a market valuation of more than $900 billion. It's not difficult to determine why. In reviewing their financials, you would find that the company's revenue climbed 30 times between 2010 and 2021 to reach $87 billion, and their net income increased 29 times to $35 billion. However, Tencent's fortunes have drastically shifted over the past year, with the stock price falling by more than two-thirds. After 20 years of expansion, they announced revenue reductions in the following 2 quarters of this year. And we are about to find out why. However, let's start at the very beginning. Chapter 1, What Started Tencent? Ma Huateng, a Chinese businessman, along with 4 of his old classmates created Tencent back in 1998. When the internet first came to exist, Ma attended a presentation for the Israeli startup Mirabilis' online instant messaging service, ICQ. Then just a few years after, Ma developed his own version of ICQ, dubbed QQ, for instant chatting. In the following years, QQ's popularity exploded, making it by far the most widely used instant messaging service in China. When Microsoft launched its MSN messaging service in China in the early 2000s, Tencent quickly copied many of the same features and functionality into QQ. However, they also added new features like customizable avatars and other ways for users to customize their profiles to express themselves online. As a result, QQ was considerably more appealing to younger generations than Microsoft MSN, which was primarily used in corporate settings. The QQ messaging program was free to use, and they made money by charging subscription fees for premium features. However, there is a limit to how much people will pay for a premium messaging feature. The issue was that most of the users didn't use any premium features, which resulted in a minimal average revenue per user. In order to raise capital, they sold a 47% stake in the company to a South African media conglomerate for $32 million. This provided them with enough capital to scrape by for a few years, but in order to monetize their hundreds of millions of active users on QQ and become consistently profitable, they had to discover a new method. Chapter 2, Gaming Services to the Rescue. Due to lax enforcement of laws against digital piracy, traditional console games were mostly unavailable in China in the 2000s. No one was ready to pay $60 for a console game when they could just purchase a copy on a street market for $5. Tencent was one of the first businesses to understand that if people were going to pirate the games anyway, it might as well be free. It can then be monetized by selling in-game microtransactions like custom avatars and various power-ups that are almost impossible to pirate. Even though it might just cost a few dollars from each user, the total revenue would be substantial, considering a lot of people play the games regularly. They went to a number of foreign video game developers, mainly in South Korea and the US, and made a brief presentation to them because they lacked any experience in video game creation at the time. These games would become blockbusters overnight if Tencent localized them into Chinese and distributed them to QQ users, who already had a sizable captive audience on their QQ program. One of their earliest and most fruitful licensing agreements was with the South Korean MMORPG Dungeon Fighter Online. With their new game licensing model, Tencent gained revenue without having to incur the extremely high costs of developing the games themselves. As a result, they swiftly turned a profit and in 2004 raised $200 million through an IPO on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. With their IPO revenues, they invested in internally producing their own games, giving them the war chest they needed to pursue their video gaming ambitions. Early in the 2010s, when smartphones became more widely used, game developers switched their attention from desktop games to mobile games, which caused a growth explosion. As early as 2010, when QQ Speed was released, a racing game greatly influenced by Mario Kart, practically all of their original games were heavily influenced by games that were already well known outside of China. Because the idea had already been tested in other areas and the games were hugely successful, this technique significantly reduced the danger of a game being a flop in China, where QQ had over 600 million members by 2011. Chapter 3, A Bit of Luck and Continuous Steps in the Right Direction. Already by 2010, Tencent was one of the largest internet companies in China, annually generating a steady revenue of $3 billion, and it was about to get bigger. This is because it was also around this time that China implemented a great firewall which saw Western internet companies such as Google and Facebook banned from operating in the country. They released their free WeChat messaging software in 2011, and it quickly gained popularity. One of WeChat's big selling points was its voice recording feature, which allowed users to record themselves speaking into a microphone and share the clip as if it were a text message. Within 2 years, it had more than 100 million users in China. WeChat Pay, which allows users to link their bank accounts to the app and use their phone to make purchases, is by far the most crucial WeChat feature in terms of revenue. WeChat Pay soon overtook other consumer payment options in China because it is significantly more convenient and secure than carrying huge sums of cash in your wallet. They generate revenue by charging merchants a transaction charge of between 0.1 and 1, which is far cheaper than that of the majority of credit and debit cards. They also sell advertising space within WeChat user feeds, much like Facebook does with its Messenger app. WeChat had fast growth in the 2010s and spread like wildfire throughout China. In 2017, they reached 1 billion monthly active users, making them the largest social media firm in China by a wide margin and the second largest in the world, only behind Facebook. Chapter 4, A List of Tencent's Acquisition. They concentrated on both domestic and international markets for their acquisitions. The majority of their international acquisitions were in the video game sector, including Epic Games, which is behind games like Fortnite and the Unreal Engine, and Riot Games, the company behind League of Legends, Valorant, Clash of Clans, and Supercell. Their domestic acquisitions were more diverse, and they included the streaming services for video games and music, China Music Corporation, and Huya, which they later rebranded as Tencent Media Entertainment. They also founded Tencent Pictures, a film production company that produces films for the Chinese market. League of Legends, Fortnite, and Valorant, which they acquired from international video game publishers, became some of the most popular and lucrative games in the world. Tencent appeared unstoppable at this point, and even the pandemic in 2020 didn't pose a problem for them as usage of video games and WeChat increased with people spending more time at home. Their revenue peaked at $86 billion in 2021, and they made $35 billion of net profit, making them one of the most profitable companies in history. They listed it on the New York Stock Exchange in 2018, where it then attained a $21 billion valuation with Tencent maintaining a controlling stake. Their share price reached its pinnacle that year at 741 Hong Kong dollars per share, giving them a market capitalization of $900 billion. At the time, they appeared to be on track to become the first tech giant valued at $1 trillion outside of the United States. But then things were about to turn ugly. Chapter 5, A Turn in Luck. There were indications in 2018 that the Chinese government was dissatisfied with the video game sector. In China, video games have soared in popularity, especially with the younger generations. Nearsightedness is often thought to be largely caused by playing video games. According to estimates, about half of Chinese minors wear corrective lenses. Excessive gaming can also have other negative effects, such as keeping kids away from their education. A video game called Monster Hunter World, for which Tencent served as the sole Chinese distributor, was outlawed in 2018. This prohibition, which appeared to be arbitrary, was a clear indication that China was intensifying its crackdown on the sector. It appeared that Tencent could resume its prior growth trajectory within a few months of the government restarting the approval of video games, but these hopes were dashed in the summer of 2021 when Chinese state news outlets began harshly criticizing the video game industry, even going so far as to compare the addictiveness of online games to opium. Soon after, the government passed some of its strictest video game laws, which currently include a weekly cap on children video game time at 3 hours. They also imposed a general suspension on the approval of all new video games. This affected Tencent harshly. Revenue had decreased by 7% as of the second quarter of 2022 compared to the peak in the fourth quarter of 2021, which isn't a huge drop. For the first time in the business's history, revenue decreased rather than increased. The majority of the decline has been caused by online advertising and FBS, short for fintech and business services, which includes WeChat Pay transaction fees and various enterprise solutions that Tencent sells to Chinese companies. China's GDP growth has drastically decreased as a result of the country's ongoing COVID restrictions, high energy costs, and droughts. As fewer people are moving around, fewer people are using WeChat Pay to make purchases. Businesses all around the nation are also seeing a decline in revenue, which has led them to reduce their spending on WeChat and QQ advertisements. Surprisingly, their domestic video game revenue has remained relatively stable, only declining by about 5% from its peak because existing games are still generating revenue. The impact of the new game ban won't be felt for some time, so the one bright spot is international video game revenue, which has quadrupled since 2019. They moved their investments in recent years toward international games because they were aware that the regulatory landscape in China was becoming increasingly unstable. So while the revenue that Tencent has been generating has been on a minute decrease, there is still hope for so much increase. Tencent has shown remarkable growth over the past 20 years. Through strategic investments and innovative partnerships, Tencent has become an undeniable leader in technology and media. The company's success can be attributed to its commitment to staying ahead of the curve by finding new ways to keep up with the changing landscape of technology. In addition, Tencent's long-term focus on developing valuable digital services has kept them ahead of the competition in China's digital economy.